The Midnight Owl Diner is gone now. In its place stands a state-of-the-art trauma clinic, funded anonymously, run flawlessly. Nobody knows the woman behind it used to clean tables for tips. Nobody knows she once pressed a burning spatula into a man's open wound at 2 a.m. to keep him alive. Nobody knows that man is now the undisputed king of Chicago, and she is his queen. This is how they got there. This channel is dedicated to stories of power, sacrifice, and the kind of love that doesn't just survive the storm, it becomes one. Greatness rarely announces itself. Most of the time, it walks in through a broken door on a rainy night and gets to work. If you want more stories like this, subscribe right now. And don't forget to like and share so others can find us too.
The Midnight Owl Diner was a forgotten spot on a highway just outside Chicago, a relic from the 1980s that always smelled like burnt coffee, strong bleach, and old cooking oil. It was a place that drew in the lost, the lonely, and people who liked the quiet of the early morning. Nora Hayes liked the late shift. At 24, it helped pay her bills, let her avoid people, and gave her a quiet place to read her worn-out nursing school books. Outside, sheets of rain hammered against the diner's big glass windows. The neon sign over the door was broken, reading "The Midnight O," and it buzzed loudly. Inside, Nora was cleaning the counter of booth 4, her thoughts focused on the rent for her tiny apartment in Logan Square. Only two other people were there, a tired truck driver named Pete sleeping over his food, and old Mr. Henderson, a retired mechanic who couldn't hear well and was working on a crossword puzzle. That's when the bell on the door didn't just ring, it violently destroyed the silence. The glass door flew open with so much power it splintered against the wall. The wind and rain screamed into the diner, carrying that sharp metallic scent of blood. Two men fell through the doorway. The first was huge, his face a picture of pure terror, his nice suit soaked with rain and dark, sticky blood. He was holding up the second man, who was a limp weight being pulled across the floor. Pete the trucker woke with a start. He saw the black Glock pistol clutched in the big man's hand, and that was enough. Pete jumped out of his seat, dropped a wrinkled $20 bill on the table, and ran to the back door without saying a thing. Mr. Henderson never looked up, focused on a six-letter word for disaster. Nora was frozen in place behind the counter, holding a wet cloth. "Lock the door now," the standing man shouted, his Irish accent thick with panic. He had messy blonde hair and his eyes darted everywhere like a trapped animal. This man was Finnick O'Connor, but Nora wouldn't learn that until later. Nora couldn't move. Her heart was beating hard against her ribs. I said, "Lock the door." Finnick pointed the gun straight at her. "Now, sweetheart." A powerful need to survive finally broke through her fear. Nora let the cloth fall, ran to the front door, forced it shut against the storm, and threw the heavy lock. She pulled down the rattling metal security blinds with shaking hands. When she looked back, Finnick had placed the other man down on the main counter, knocking napkin, holders, and salt shakers onto the floor with a loud bang. The man on the counter wore an expensive, custom-made charcoal suit, now ripped and soaked with the blood that was forming a large puddle under him. But it was his face that stole Nora's breath, even pale and twisted in pain. He had sharp features, high cheekbones, a strong jaw with dark stubble, and black hair stuck to his forehead from the rain. She knew who he was. Anyone in Chicago who paid attention to the news recognized that face. Declan Fitzpatrick, the new leader of the Fitzpatrick crime family, a man said to run the docks, the unions, and many of the state's politicians. He was a ghost, a monster in a fancy suit, and he was dying right there on her counter. "He's hurt bad." Finnick choked out, his hands pushing hard against Declan's right side, below his ribs, and on another wound by his collarbone. Blood was pushing through Finnick's fingers with a steady, awful pace. "The safe clinic is 20 minutes from here. He's not going to make it. He's bleeding out." "Call 911, Nora whispered, her voice unsteady. "No police, no ambulances, Finnick yelled, turning on her and raising the gun again. The Russo family has watchers at every emergency room within a 10-mile circle. They set up this attack. If we take him to a hospital, he will be gone before they can operate. Declan made a deep, pained sound, and his head fell to the side. His lips were becoming a frightening blue color. The pool of blood on the counter was getting bigger, dripping onto the floor with a sick sound. "He's going into hypovolemic shock," Nora said. The words came out before she could think. 2 years of nursing training, before her mom's fatal sickness made her quit, suddenly came rushing back to her mind. Finnick just stared at her, and his gun lowered a little. "What did you say?" "His blood pressure is dropping dangerously fast." Nora explained, her voice becoming stronger as her old training took over. The fear was still a cold lump in her gut. But seeing a man dying was more important than the fact that he was a dangerous criminal. "If you cannot stop that bleeding now, his heart is going to fail in under 3 minutes. "Then you fix him!" Finnick screamed, grabbing her apron and pulling her close. "Do something, or I promise you will be next. Let go of me or he dies right now," Nora yelled back. The sheer command in her tone surprised them both. She knocked Finnick's hand off her apron. "I cannot work with that thing in my face. Go wash your hands. Use the sink over there. Hot water and a lot of soap. Go." Finnick blinked, totally confused by this small waitress ordering him around, but a weak moan from Declan made him move. He put the gun in his pants and hurried to the kitchen. Nora moved with a sharp, focused speed. She ran to the office in the back, kicked the door in, and grabbed the big first aid box from the wall. She knew it was not nearly enough. Gauze pads would not fix this. She rushed through the kitchen, grabbing 2 clean aprons, a bottle of strong, cheap vodka for Mr. Henderson's coffee, and a big roll of gray duct tape. Back at the counter, Nora pushed Finnick out of the way. "Point your phone's flashlight on him, and hold it still." She opened the vodka and poured it all over her hands, flinching from the burn, before dumping a lot of it on Declan's wounds. Declan's eyes shot open. They were a sharp, stormy gray color, now wide with shock and terrible pain. A loud, raw scream ripped out of him, and his hand grabbed Nora's wrist like it was made of steel. "Stay with me," Nora said, making herself meet his wild eyes. "I know it hurts. You've been shot. I need to find the source of the bleeding." Declan's eyes were hazy with fever, but he focused on her face. His grip was tight enough to leave bruises, but he didn't try to stop her. He was struggling to breathe, his chest rising and falling unevenly. Nora grabbed a pair of large kitchen scissors from her pocket and cut away the ruined shirt, revealing his muscular and tattooed chest. The wound near his collarbone was messy, but had missed anything vital. The injury on his right side was the real problem. Dark, oxygen-starved blood was flowing out steadily. His liver or a major vein had been hit. "Gauze," Nora ordered. Finnick shoved the whole box at her. She pressed a thick pile of sterile pads into the wound, but the blood soaked through them in a second. "It's too deep inside. Pressure is not working," she said to herself as panic tried to take over. "I have to cauterize it." "Cauterize it?" Finnick shouted. "Are you crazy? You are a waitress." "I am all he has," Nora shot back. "Go to the kitchen stove, get the metal spatula from the hook, turn the burner on high and heat that spatula until it is glowing red. Now." Finnick did not waste time. He ran for the stove. The sharp clicking of the gas starter echoed in the diner, followed by the whoosh of the flame. Nora looked at Declan. He was slipping away again, his eyes closing. "Hey, listen to me," she said, tapping his face. "Do not fall asleep." Declan's lips parted. His words were a quiet murmur under the storm's noise. She leaned down, her ear close to his mouth. "An angel?" he whispered, a small bubble of blood on his lips. "Are you here to take me?" "Not this time," Nora said with force. "Tonight, I am only the waitress." "It's ready," Finnick called out, hurrying back with the long spatula held in a towel. The metal tip was glowing a frightening, angry orange. Hold his shoulders down tight, Nora told Finnick. He is going to fight it. Use all your entire weight. Finnick pressed down on his boss, pinning his wide shoulders to the pastry counter. Nora drew a sharp breath, her hands trembling. There was no room for error. One mistake would scorch healthy tissue, and he would still bleed to death. I am so sorry, she whispered to Declan. She forced the glowing hot metal into the wound, directly against the source of the bleeding. The sizzle of burning flesh filled the air, followed by the foul, metallic smell of cooked meat and blood. Declan unleashed a scream of pure agony, so powerful it made the diner's glass windows shake. His body bucked violently off the counter, almost knocking the massive Finnick off his feet. Declan's hands gripped the counter's edge until his knuckles were white, his eyes rolling back before the sheer pain finally made him pass out. Nora flung the spatula into the metal sink with a loud crash. She snatched clean linen aprons, folded them into a thick pad, and pressed it firmly over the cauterized wound. She wrapped heavy duct tape around Declan's torso again and again, securing the makeshift bandage tightly against his body. She stepped back, breathing heavily, her own uniform soaked with his blood. She watched his chest. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3. It rose, then fell in a shallow but steady rhythm. The bleeding had stopped. Finnick felt for a pulse on his boss's neck and let out a shaky breath that sounded like a sob. He is alive! Oh my God, he is alive! 30 minutes later, the sound of squealing tires announced a sleek, black, unmarked medical van. 3 people hurried inside, led by a sharp-eyed, elegant older woman holding 2 large black medical bags. She was Dr. Sofia Calvetti, the syndicate's private trauma surgeon. Sophia surveyed the scene, the bloody counter, the vodka, the duct tape, and the scorched spatula in the sink. She checked Declan's vitals and the bandage. She then looked at Nora, who was huddled by the coffee makers, shivering in the diner's warmth. You are responsible for this? Sophia asked, her Italian accent sharp. Nora gave a numb nod. You saved his life, Sophia stated quietly. A single millimeter to the left, and you would have destroyed his liver. This was brutal, but it was perfect. He would have died 20 minutes ago. The men quickly moved Declan onto a stretcher. As they carried him out, Finnick paused in front of Nora. He took a thick wad of $100 bills from his blood-stained jacket and dropped it on the counter. It looked like at least $10,000. Tonight never happened, Finnick said, his voice low and serious. No police, no talking. For your own good, you forget everything. Nora just stared at the blood-covered money. When she looked up again, the diner was silent and empty. The only evidence that the head of Chicago's underworld had nearly died on her counter was the puddle of blood on the floor and the lingering smell of metal in the air. 3 weeks went by, feeling like a lifetime spent in limbo. Nora spent the first 3 days scrubbing the diner with bleach until her hands were raw, trying to get rid of the ghost smell of burned blood. She did not touch the money. She hid the stack of bills inside a hollowed-out textbook under her floorboards. It felt like holding a curse. She checked the news every morning, expecting to read about the death of Declan Fitzpatrick. But there was nothing. No death notices, no new gang war on the streets. The syndicate's legitimate businesses, like shipping and real estate, ran as usual. The whole night at the Midnight Owl Diner felt like a bad dream. Nora tried to slip back into her old life. She served eggs to Pete the trucker, poured coffee for Mr. Henderson, and returned to her small, drafty apartment on the 3rd floor of an old brick building. But the shadows were getting longer. It began with little things. A dark sedan was now always parked at the end of her street when she walked home. A man in a trench coat would sit in booth 2, ordering only black coffee and watching her for his entire shift. Nora convinced herself it was just paranoia. The Fitzpatrick syndicate wanted her to forget, so they were leaving her alone. That is how it worked, was it not? She was mistaken. She just did not realize who was actually watching her. It happened on a Tuesday evening, a rare night she had off. Nora was walking up the dark, narrow alley behind her apartment, carrying a bag of groceries. The streetlights flickered, throwing long, twisted shadows around the dumpsters. Nora Hayes. A voice spoke from the darkness by the fire escape. Nora froze, her hands clenching the paper grocery bag. A man emerged into the dim light. He was not one of the men from the diner. This man was thin, wearing a cheap leather jacket, with an ugly scar that ran from his ear down to his collar. He had a cruel, crooked smile. Two more men appeared from the shadows behind him, blocking her way out to the street. "Who are you?" Nora asked, stepping backward until her back was against the rough brick wall. "The name is Dominic," the scarred man said, casually drawing a long, serrated hunting knife from his belt. "I am with Tobias Russo. You may have heard of him." Nora felt a chill run through her. The Russo family were the rivals who had ordered the hit on Declan. "I do not know that name," Nora lied, her voice shaking. "I have no money. You can just take my groceries." Dominic chuckled, a dry, raspy noise. "We are not interested in your food, sweetheart. 3 weeks ago, we had a target cornered on Highway 41. We put 2 bullets in him and watched him bleed. He should have died right there. But our inside source says he somehow survived. Word is, his car was seen outside a dirty little diner before he got to his private doctor." He moved a step closer, the knife's blade catching the dim light. "Hobie Russo is very unhappy. That operation cost him a lot of money. He needs to know how Declan Fitzpatrick is still alive. And he wants to send a message to the person who helped him." "I have no idea what you are talking about," Nora said, her breathing heavy with fear. She frantically looked for a way to escape, but the alley was a dead end. "Get her," Dominic ordered his men. "Put her in the trunk. Toby wants to have a word with her himself." The two men moved toward her. Nora screamed and hurled the heavy grocery bag at the first man's face. Cans of soup and oranges scattered across the ground. She tried to run past them, but a strong hand grabbed her hair, pulling her back so hard that she saw stars. She was slammed against the brick wall, the impact knocking the wind out of her. Dominic came closer, pressing the cold, flat side of his blade against her cheek. "You foolish girl. You will be screaming a lot more tonight." Suddenly, the roar of a powerful engine filled the quiet alley. A sleek, armored black SUV sped into the narrow space, its headlights blindingly bright. It did not slow down. It crashed right into one of Dominic's men, pinning his leg against a metal dumpster with a terrible crunching sound. The man screamed and fell to the ground. Dominic whirled around, shielding his eyes and raising his gun. Before he could fire, the SUV's back doors burst open. 4 men jumped out, moving with frightening speed and precision. The muffled hiss of suppressed weapons cut through the night. Dominic's other man fell immediately, grabbing his shattered knee. Dominic himself was hit in the shoulder, which spun him around and sent his knife flying into the darkness. "Do not move, Russo trash," a familiar rough Irish voice called out. Finnick appeared in the light, aiming a heavy assault rifle at Dominic's head. "Or I will splatter your brains all over this wall." Nora slid down the brick wall as her legs gave out. She trembled, staring at the sudden chaos. The back door of the SUV opened wider. A man stepped out into the cool night air. He walked more slowly now, leaning on a silver-handled cane, but his presence was just as commanding. Declan Fitzpatrick was dressed perfectly in a dark navy suit. The pale, dying man from the diner was gone. In his place stood the ultimate predator of Chicago, his stormy gray eyes fixed on Nora. He walked toward her, the sound of his cane tapping rhythmically against the groans of the wounded men. He stopped directly in front of her and looked down. "Dominic," Declan said, his gaze never leaving Nora. His voice was smooth, deep, and filled with complete authority. "Tell Toby Russo that if he ever sends his people into my territory again, I will not just eliminate his men. I will burn his entire estate to the ground with him inside it." "Go to hell, Fitzpatrick," Dominic spat through clenched teeth. Declan paid him no mind. He just gave a slight nod. Finnick moved forward and struck Dominic across the jaw with the butt of his rifle, knocking him unconscious. Declan finally bent down, wincing as the motion seemed to aggravate his healing injuries. He held out a large, warm hand to Nora. "I told you I was only a waitress," Nora whispered, looking at his hand like it was a weapon. "Your man told me to forget what happened. I wanted to forget you." Declan's voice was soft, his mob boss exterior cracking for just a moment. "I know. I also tried to leave you alone. But the Russos never believe in accidents, and my men watched you to ensure they never found out. Tonight, they did." "What happens now?" Nora whispered, tears of pure exhaustion finally tracing paths down her cheeks. "You saved my life. We are square. Please, let me walk away." Declan's jaw went rigid. He took her hand, his touch firm but gentle, and pulled her to her feet. The warmth from his hand was a stark contrast to the alley's chill. "We are not square, Nora," he said, his intense eyes locking onto hers. "You brought a dead man back to life. In my world, that creates a blood debt. Toby Russo knows your name now. If you stay here, you will be dead before sunrise." "I can run," she argued. "I know how to disappear." "You cannot hide from them," Declan answered, his voice lowering to a deep murmur that traced a shiver down her spine. "But they are not allowed to touch what is mine." Nora's eyes went wide. "I am not yours." "You are now," Declan stated, turning to the open door of a large vehicle. "Get in the car, Angel. Your job at the diner is finished for good." The Fitzpatrick property in Lake Forest was more than a house. It was a fortress disguised as a tribute to generational wealth. The limestone mansion sat on 10 acres of perfect lawns overlooking the turbulent, dark waters of Lake Michigan. It was protected by 12-foot gates, high-definition thermal cameras, and men in suits who moved with the disciplined posture of former soldiers. Nora woke up tangled in cool, heavy linens. The bed felt softer than anything she had ever experienced. The room was immense, decorated in soft shades of gray and cream. Windows from the floor to the ceiling gave a frighteningly beautiful view of the lake, but when she tested the shiny brass handle on the doors to the balcony, it was immovable. They were locked from the outside. A sharp, cold panic cut through her exhaustion from the night before. She was a prisoner, just a very well-kept and expensive one. She pushed the blankets away and saw she was in a silk nightgown that was not hers. Her jeans and her blood-covered uniform were gone. A thick cashmere robe was on a velvet chair. She tied it around her waist and walked to the heavy oak bedroom door. It opened easily into a long, carpeted hall with original paintings and antique lights. Standing just outside her door was Finnick. He stood with his hands clasped neatly behind him. He seemed much calmer than he was at the Midnight Owl, wearing a clean white shirt and a dark vest. The polished look was spoiled by the clear outline of a gun under his arm. "Good morning, Miss Hayes," Finnick said with his polite but thick Irish accent. "I hope you rested. Mrs. Hughes, the housekeeper, has put fresh clothes for you in the dressing room. Breakfast is ready in the sunroom." "I do not want breakfast," Nora said, her voice strained. "I want my own clothes, my cell phone, and a taxi to Logan Square." Finnick gave her a smile that was both kind and completely unmoving. "I am sorry, but that is not possible." The boss was very clear. "You cannot leave this house without a guard, and you are definitely not going back to your apartment. That place has been completely cleared out. We are bringing your things here." "He cleared out my apartment?" Nora's voice grew louder, bouncing off the high ceiling. "He is not allowed to do that. This is a kidnapping. This is a relocation so you can keep breathing, sweetheart," another voice cut in. Nora spun around to see Dr. Sophia Calvetti hurrying down the hall with a doctor's bag. She gave Nora a quick nod. "Tobias Russo's people set your apartment building on fire at 4 o'clock this morning. The official story is a gas leak. The unofficial one is 3 guys with gas cans and a lighter. You would be ashes now if Declan had not gotten you out of there." The words felt like a punch to the gut. Her legs went weak, and she had to grab the doorframe to stay upright. Her nursing textbooks, her mother's old pictures, the entire life she had worked so hard to build, were all gone. A deep sense of loss hit her. It was instantly replaced by a hot, blinding rage. "Where is he?" Nora snapped, her eyes blazing. Finnick paused and looked toward Dr. Calvetti. The doctor just shrugged. He is in the study. He just took his last dose of intravenous antibiotics. Please do not get him worked up. Nora did not ask for a guide. She stormed past Finnick, moving through the maze of hallways until she reached a pair of enormous mahogany doors guarded by two more silent, large men. They moved out of her way, opening the doors for her. The study had the scent of leather, strong coffee, and a slight metallic smell of antiseptic. Declan Fitzpatrick was at a huge desk made of dark walnut. He looked very pale. Dark shadows under his gray eyes stood out against his sharp cheekbones. He wore a dark shirt that was loose enough for the thick bandages underneath, while he reviewed financial papers with cold precision. He glanced up when she burst in. The irritation on his face disappeared, replaced by a guarded, unreadable look. "You destroyed my entire life," Nora said, her voice trembling with fury as she walked straight to his desk. "Toby Russo destroyed your apartment," Declan corrected her calmly, placing his gold pen on the desk. "I told you they would not give up. I just ensured you were not there when it happened." "So what is next?" she shouted, throwing her hands in the air. "Am I supposed to live here, your little pet waitress in a gilded cage? I have a life, Declan. I have tuition for nursing school. I have bills to pay." Declan rose to his feet. He moved slowly, trying to hide the pain coming from his healing wound, but his large frame still filled the room. He took a sleek, black, American Express Centurion card from the desk and slid it across the polished surface toward her. "Your bills are handled," Declan said, his voice a low growl. "Your tuition for the Chicago Memorial Nursing Program is paid for the next 4 years through a private grant. For anything else you require, use this." Nora just stared at the black card like it was a poisonous insect. "You believe you can just purchase me? Erase the fact that you pulled me into your mob war?" Declan came around the desk, his slight limp obvious, until he stood just inches away from her. The difference in their height was immense. Nora had to crane her neck to meet his gaze. This close, she saw the subtle lines of stress around his mouth, the physical cost of running an empire while his own body tried to heal. "I do not purchase people, Nora," Declan said. His tone softened, the cold edge of the crime boss giving way to the tired man beneath. "I take care of what belongs to me. You saved my life. You reached into my chest and pulled me out of the darkness. That is why Russo has you in his sights. You will stay here until Tobias Russo is gone and his entire organization is in ruins. You will be kept safe. You will be given everything you need. But you will not step outside these gates." "And how long is that going to take?" she whispered. All the fight had left her, replaced by a chilling fear. Declan reached up and used his large, rough thumb to gently tuck a piece of her hair behind her ear. The simple touch was surprisingly gentle and sent a current of warmth through her. "As long as it takes to clean up the streets," he answered quietly. "Welcome to the family, Angel." 2 weeks passed in a weird, suffocating pattern. Nora could go anywhere inside the mansion and the enclosed gardens, but she was always being watched by security. She spent her time in the huge 2-story library, studying the classic medical books and new journals that Declan had acquired just for her. She started to understand the household routine. She learned that Declan took his coffee black, slept fewer than 4 hours each night, and had meetings in the basement that made his men look shaken and scared. She also realized that for all his brutal reputation, he had a sharp and formidable mind. He did not lead with yelling. He led with cold, surgical planning, and she realized he was observing her as well. She would often raise her head from a book and see him standing in the library's entrance, leaning on his cane with a silver handle, simply watching her. The space between them felt heavy, charged with a silent feeling that was a mix of gratitude, confinement, and a powerful, growing attraction. He never crossed any lines, but his presence was a constant weight that defined her new world. That delicate balance broke apart on a Thursday evening. A thick, sticky humidity had descended over Lake Michigan, unleashing a fierce thunderstorm that shook the windows of the house. Declan had arranged a sudden meeting with his closest advisors. Several of his top captains, including Finnick and a sharp-looking man named Silas, were in the main dining room under the pretense of a formal dinner. Nora went to the library to read a chapter on heart medication, but the loud, indistinct voices from down the hall made it impossible to concentrate. The syndicate was hemorrhaging money. Russo's people had seized 3 of their shipping containers at the port of Chicago, and fighting back was getting expensive. Around 11 at night, the heavy oak doors of the dining room flew open. Nora emerged from the library just in time to see Silas fall into the hallway. The capo's face was deathly pale and covered in a sudden, heavy sweat. He grabbed his chest, his eyes rolling back as he collapsed onto the imported Persian rug. His body immediately began to shake in violent, stiff convulsions. The scene exploded into chaos. Finnick instantly drew his weapon, his eyes scanning the empty hall for a threat. Declan was right beside him, his expression a mask of pure rage. "Get Sophia right now!" Declan yelled, dropping to his knees next to his seizing right-hand man. Nora didn't even hesitate. The rush of adrenaline erased any fear of the armed men all around her. She ran down the hallway and slid onto her knees next to Silas. "Get out of the way," she commanded Declan, pushing his shoulder. "He's having a heart attack," Finnick shouted, reaching for his phone. "It is not a heart attack," Nora snapped, her gaze quickly examining Silas's face. She gripped his jaw and forced his mouth open. She got very close, sniffing the air by his lips. She detected a faint, sickeningly sweet smell, like bitter almonds and garlic mixed together. His pupils are tiny. He is turning blue. He is rigid, not shaking. She looked up at Declan, her own heart pounding. What did he eat? What did he drink? "We all had the same scotch, Malin 25, Declan said, his mind racing. "But Silas is on medication. He took a pill just before we ate." "Who gave it to him?" Nora insisted. Declan's eyes grew dark as a terrible thought occurred to him. He looked up at one of the younger soldiers standing near the dining room door, a quiet driver nobody ever noticed named Leo. The moment Leo saw the look on Declan's face, he turned and ran for the service stairway. "I want him alive!" Declan shouted at Finnick. Finnick took off without a second thought, chasing after the traitor. Nora refocused her attention on Silas. "It is an organophosphate or some synthetic neurotoxin. It was inside the pill capsule. His respiratory system is failing." Dr. Sophia Calvetti came running down the hall, her medical bag in hand. Nora didn't give her a chance to ask anything. "Neurotoxin poisoning, probably ingested in a capsule 10 minutes ago," Nora stated with clinical precision. "He needs the maximum dose of atropine immediately, and we have to intubate or he will suffocate on his own fluids." Sophia did not question her. She unzipped the bag, grabbed a pre-filled syringe of atropine, and tossed a laryngoscope and an endotracheal tube to Nora. "You handle the airway. I will administer the medicine." Nora's hands were incredibly steady. She tilted Silas's head back like an expert, slid the metal blade of the laryngoscope past his tongue, and found his vocal cords. "I am in," she announced, guiding the plastic tube down his throat while Sophia injected the needle deep into Silas's thigh. For 2 very long minutes, Nora squeezed the ambu bag by hand, pushing oxygen into the capo's paralyzed lungs. The violent seizures slowly started to fade. The awful blue color of his lips began to return to a pale, unhealthy pink. Sophia checked for a pulse. "It is stabilizing. We need to get him to the underground clinic now and connect him to a ventilator." As the guards came forward to lift the unconscious Silas onto a stretcher, Nora fell back against the mahogany wall paneling. She was gasping for air, her hands suddenly shaking without control as the adrenaline rush faded. The hallway emptied, leaving just Nora and Declan. Declan stood over her. The storm raged outside, and a flash of lightning lit up the hard, severe lines of his face. The reality of what just occurred hung thick in the air. Tobias Russo had paid off one of Declan's own men. The war had finally broken through their defenses. Declan reached down, took Nora by her upper arms, and pulled her effortlessly to her feet. He did not release her. He slowly backed her up until her shoulders were against the wall. He was near, far too near, his big frame trapping her. He smelled like rain, expensive scotch, and the dangerous iron scent of a man prepared for war. "You did it again," Declan whispered, his voice incredibly strained. His stormy eyes studied her face, taking in every trace of her exhaustion. "My fortress has been breached. My men have been bought, and yet, the waitress from the midnight shift is the only one keeping my family from the grave." "I am a nurse," Nora said, barely breathing, unable to break his intense stare. "This is what I do." "You are a damn miracle," Declan corrected her, his voice falling to a low, almost worshipful whisper. Before she could understand the change in his tone, Declan's hand moved from her arm to her neck, his fingers tangling in her hair. He lowered his head, and his mouth came down hard on hers. It was not a soft kiss. It was desperate and bruising, fueled by the rush of a near-death experience and a shocking betrayal. It tasted like scotch and total ownership. Nora gasped into his mouth. Her hands came up on their own to push against his wide chest. But the second her fingers made contact with the solid muscle under his shirt, her own body betrayed her. She grabbed his shirt, pulling him even closer, and matched the fierce, demanding pressure of his kiss. For a man who lived his entire life in control, Declan kissed her like he was drowning, and she was the only air in the room. When he finally broke away, they were both breathing hard. Declan leaned his forehead against hers, his eyes shut. "Leo will tell us everything Russo has planned," Declan said quietly. His tone was lethal, a sharp contrast to their intimate position. "And then I am going to finish this war. But I want you to understand this, Nora." He opened his eyes, holding her gaze with a look of terrifying certainty. "You are not just a debt to me anymore. You are mine." The storm passed just before sunrise, leaving behind a thick, heavy fog that blanketed the manicured lawns of the Lake Forest estate. Inside, the air was just as dense, thick with the metallic smell of coming violence. Nora sat on the edge of her bed, completely dressed in black pants and a thick sweater. She had not been able to sleep. Her lips still felt the burn from Declan's kiss, a collision between two entirely different worlds. It was a clear declaration that she was no longer simply a medical resource or a debt to be settled. She was now tangled in the very foundations of the Fitzpatrick syndicate. Down in the soundproofed basement, Declan and Finnick were taking apart the traitor Leo. Nora's stomach twisted at the idea of a mafia interrogation, but her clinical mind could not help but imagine the brutal anatomy of the violence happening below. At 6 a.m., her bedroom door opened. Declan was standing in the doorway. His white shirt was unbuttoned at the neck, the sleeves rolled to his elbows, showing forearms that were tense with muscle and dotted with small dark specks of blood. His face was like a stone mask, but his stormy gray eyes softened just a little when they landed on her. "Is it done?" Nora asked, her voice sounding scratchy in the heavy silence. Declan went straight into the connecting bathroom, turned on the water, and started scrubbing his hands with a rough bar of soap. "Leo talked," Declan said over the sound of the faucet. "Russo threatened his younger sister, said he'd cut her into pieces if he did not put the neurotoxin in the pill for Silas." Nora leaned on the bathroom doorframe. "So Russo is trying to isolate you." "It is worse." Declan turned off the water and threw the towel down. The exhaustion was finally showing through his tough exterior. "Leo was only the delivery person. Russo has someone else much higher up. Someone who gave him security rotations, building plans, and the schedule for the underground clinic." Nora felt a chill run through her. "Who?" "Barrett," Declan answered without emotion. The name struck Nora like a punch to the gut. Barrett was the chief of security for the estate. He was the ex-Marine who had walked with Nora through the gardens and had stood guard right outside her door. He has been feeding Russo information for 6 months, Declan went on. Russo offered him $2 million and control of the South Side routes. Barrett is the one responsible for me ending up bleeding all over your counter. Where is he right now? Nora's eyes glanced toward the hall. Declan looked at his heavy Rolex watch. He is on the day shift, due to arrive at the main gate in 20 minutes. When he uses his card, the gates will lock him inside. Finnick and I will be waiting in the gatehouse. We will take him alive, locate Russo, and end this. He stepped forward with his clean hands and cupped Nora's face. His thumbs gently brushed her cheekbones. Stay inside this room. Lock the door. Do not open it for anyone except for me or Finnick. Do you understand me? Declan, I need you to promise me, he ordered, his voice strained with urgency. Barrett is like a cornered animal. If he figures out that we know, he will try to use the one thing in this house I cannot risk losing. He kissed her on the forehead, a long, protective press of his lips, before he walked out. The heavy door clicked shut, and the deadbolt slid home with a loud, final sound. Nora walked back and forth in the room, her eyes on the fog swirling against the floor-to-ceiling windows. 7 o'clock came and passed. Then 7:15. There was no gunfire, no yelling, just the heavy silence of the giant house. At 7:30, the power suddenly went out. The soft light from the lamps disappeared. The hum from the central air system stopped. The backup generators did not turn on. A power failure this complete meant the main electrical grid and all the emergency systems. The connection had been cut by hand. Only the chief of security possessed those codes. Her bedroom doorknob jiggled. Nora stepped back, her pulse racing. A loud electronic chirp from a master keycard broke the silence. The lock clicked open. Barrett entered the room. His composed, dutiful attitude had vanished completely. He was perspiring, his gaze frantic, holding a silenced pistol. "Move from the window," Barrett commanded, shutting the door. "Let me see your hands at all times." "Declan is aware," Nora stated, summoning her professional composure. "Finnick is expecting you by the gate." "I know," Barrett scoffed. "It is why I used the old maintenance tunnels near the lake. Fitzpatrick erred, leaving you alone while he chased shadows on the property line." He covered the distance in 3 steps, seizing Nora forcefully and pushing the cold metal silencer right against the side of her head. "Move," he ordered, pushing her to the doorway. "You are my way out. Fitzpatrick will give me safe passage to prevent me from splattering your thoughts everywhere." While Barrett pushed her down the wide, curving stairs, Nora's thoughts spun. She recalled diagrams of the human body and its weak spots. Barrett was bigger and well-armed. A direct confrontation would be fatal. Yet, she was more than a server now. She had brought a crime lord back from the brink of death. She understood precisely how a body functions and how it breaks. They arrived at the huge marble entrance hall. The heavy wooden main doors were 50 feet away. "Do not take another step, Barrett." The shout came from the upstairs balcony. Declan was at the top of the staircase, a black rifle aimed squarely at Barrett's heart. Finnick appeared from the dining room doorway, his pistol raised. 2 other guards emerged from the library. He was completely surrounded. "Release the weapon, you traitorous filth!" Declan's voice shook with murderous fury. "Release it, or I will strip the flesh from your body as you scream." Barrett stood firm. He pulled Nora hard against him, pressing the gun more firmly to her head. "Stay back, Fitzpatrick," Barrett yelled, his knuckle pale on the trigger. "Put your guns down, or her blood will stain this floor. Tell your men to open the doors and get an armored car." Now Declan gritted his teeth. He glanced at Nora. Her gaze was intense, but tearless. She looked directly at him, sending a silent, urgent plea. "Do not let him escape." "You are already gone," Declan whispered, his calm voice more frightening than his roar. "Russo cannot protect you. Lower the gun, and I will make your end swift." "Open the doors!" Barrett yelled, stumbling a step back, pulling Nora along. Nora recognized her chance. When Barrett moved his feet, he was briefly unsteady. In that instant, Nora let her body go slack. becoming dead weight as she rammed her elbow back with force. She struck with surgical precision, hitting the soft spot below his ribs, a brutal shot to his liver. Barrett choked, his frame automatically pulling away from the searing agony, his hold weakening for a heartbeat. Nora dropped to the stone floor. "Now!" she yelled. The hall exploded with noise. 3 silenced rounds fired as one, the first from Finnick, the other 2 from Declan. The powerful bullets launched Barrett off his feet, sending him through the glass face of a vintage clock. He was gone before the last piece of glass hit the ground. A deafening quiet filled the space, except for the ringing in Nora's hearing. Declan reached the bottom of the stairs instantly. He fell to his knees, his gun hitting the floor, and pulled Nora tightly to him. His hands trembled uncontrollably as he searched her for injuries. "Are you hurt?" he asked, the cruel leader now just a frightened man. "Nora, answer me." "I am all right," she panted, pressing her face against his neck, breathing in the smell of cordite. "I am not hurt." Declan held her fiercely, his embrace almost painful. Finnick nudged the pistol from Barrett's still fingers and took a secure phone from his vest. "Sir," Finnick reported softly. The final text was coordinates for a warehouse in Fulton Market. "Russo is expecting him there." Declan gently released Nora. The worry in his gaze turned to cold steel. He got up, helping her stand. "Find Sophia," Declan commanded Finnick. "Get the medical van ready. Gather all our people. We are heading to Fulton Market." Nora squeezed Declan's hand. "I am coming with you." "Absolutely not. You remain here. You were nearly killed," Nora retorted, her tone filled with complete conviction. "Silas was nearly killed in this house. Barrett just attempted to shoot me. Safety is gone. If this is a battle, you will require a medic." Declan studied her, gauging the fierce determination in her expression. The timid server from the diner had vanished, replaced by a woman hardened by his reality. A gradual, knowing smile appeared on his lips. "Finnick," Declan said, his eyes still locked on Nora's. "Find the lady some body armor." The Fulton Market area of Chicago was a maze of crumbling industrial slaughterhouses. Tobias Russo's facility was at the end of Kinsey Street, a huge brick structure he used as a discrete operations center. At 9:45 in the morning, the silence there was broken for good. 4 armored Escalades crashed through the fence, stopping with a loud screech in the main yard. In the third truck, Nora felt her heart pounding. She had on a thick protective vest over her clothes, with a medical kit on her chest. Next to her, Dr. Sofia Calvete was loading a shotgun without hurry. "Keep down behind the vehicle's front," Sophia said. "Your job is to patch them up. Our job is to create the wounds." Before Nora could absorb the command, Declan exited the first truck, with Finnick and 12 armed men at his side. There was no delay. Finnick went to the strengthened metal door on the side and destroyed its hinges with 2 loud explosions. Declan forced the broken door open and his organization flooded inside. Gunfire started immediately. It was a wild chorus of machine guns and breaking cement. Russo's crew, who thought they were getting one person, were not ready for a major attack. "Medic!" a desperate voice yelled over the noise. "Move!" Sophia shouted, pushing Nora forward. Nora ran over the concrete as bullets hit the walls near her head. She dropped to the slick ground next to Marco, a young fighter for Declan, holding his injured leg. Her fear disappeared, replaced by her training, as Nora tore his pants, put a tight band above the injury, and stuffed the opening with special gauze. "You are stabilized," she ordered, twisting the handle firmly. "Stay still." She glanced up past the grim sight of hanging hooks. Russo's people were retreating, unable to stop Declan's relentless attack. Declan navigated the bedlam with a deadly elegance, his weapon firing in short-aimed shots. He was a general leading the charge himself. Across the building, in a raised office with glass walls, Tobias Russo was yelling on a radio. His expensive suit was covered in dust while he begged for help that was not coming. Declan saw him. "Provide cover," he yelled, letting his spent rifle fall and pulling out a custom 1911 pistol. While Finnick unleashed a continuous stream of bullets, Declan jumped over a moving belt and ran up the steel steps, disregarding the projectiles bouncing nearby. He smashed what was left of the office door from its hinges. Nora hurried ahead, crouching behind boxes to watch him. Inside, Russo lifted a machine pistol. Declan did not hesitate. He shot 2 times. Pop! Pop! The first bullet destroyed Russo's right shoulder, and his gun fell with a clang. The next bullet hit his right kneecap, and the other boss fell with a terrible sound. The building became strangely quiet, apart from the moans of injured men. When they saw their leader go down, the last of Russo's fighters gave up. Finnick's team secured them to columns with plastic ties. Declan looked down at Russo, with smoke rising from his gun. "It is over, Toby. Your territory is now mine. You are forgotten." Russo coughed up some blood. "The government is investigating you, Fitzpatrick. They will put you away." "Let them attempt it," Declan said quietly, pointing the gun right between Russo's eyes. "Declan, stop!" Nora called from the bottom of the stairs. She went through the broken doorway into the messy office. Declan glanced at her, but his aim remained steady. "Leave this room, Nora." "His femoral artery is severed," Nora stated, indicating the growing puddle of red by Russo's ruined knee. "A shot to the head will look like a murder to investigators, but if he loses too much blood, he is just another victim of the fight." Declan looked at her. A fresh sense of admiration and grim humor showed on his face. He glanced at Russo, whose frightened expression showed he understood his fate. "Did you hear that, Toby?" Declan said, slowly uncocking and putting away his gun. "The server says you are going to bleed out." Russo looked at Nora, his face a mix of pain and horror. "Assist me. You are a medical professional, I beg you." Nora stared down at him, her face a perfect blank slate. She remembered her apartment burning to the ground, the cold hunting knife in the alley, and the gun Barrett had forced against her temple only an hour before. She unfastened her medical bag and placed it carefully on the desk, just beyond his desperate reach. "I am off the clock," she said in a low voice. She turned her back on the dying boss and went to Declan. His chest rose and fell as he reached out, wrapping a powerful arm around her waist, pulling her tightly to his side. They left the office together, the sound of Russo's wet, frantic gasps fading away. Going down the stairs, they stepped over the defeated forms of their enemies. Finnick gave a quick nod, guiding the other men to the waiting cars. As they walked out of the shadowy warehouse, the Chicago morning sun finally broke through the clouds, bathing the city in a brilliant light, a dazzling light across the city skyline. Declan paused beside the open door of his Escalade. He looked down at Nora and gently wiped a streak of dirt and blood from her face. "It is over," he whispered, his voice hoarse from exhaustion. "The city belongs to us. You will never have to watch your back again." Nora took in the hard lines of his face and the fierce devotion in his stormy eyes. She had rescued him on a dirty diner countertop, and in return, he had burned down the entire world for her. "I know," she answered, rising up to press her lips against his. "Take me home, Declan." He gave her a real, honest smile that finally chased all the shadows from his eyes. He lifted her into the armored vehicle, getting in next to her as the convoy started its engines, driving deep into the heart of the city they now controlled together. In the end, surviving in the criminal world is not about who can pull the trigger the quickest. It is about who possesses the power to mend when the shooting stops. Nora Hayes did not just save a dying crime lord on a rainy Tuesday. She revived a whole empire and built a new dynasty that could not be shattered. Declan Fitzpatrick understood that true strength was not in a loaded firearm or a foreign bank account, but in the hands of the woman prepared to walk through fire with him. The Midnight Owl Diner has been gone for a long time, replaced with a modern trauma clinic. It is funded by a secret supporter and run perfectly by a woman who swapped a waitress uniform for a crown. Blood created their bond, violence challenged it, but absolute loyalty secured it. They are the official king and queen of Chicago. This content was carefully researched, developed, and manually edited by our team to deliver meaningful stories with valuable life lessons. Every narrative is crafted to entertain, inspire, and empower our audience. We believe that great stories can change lives, and we are committed to bringing you content that matters. Thank you for being part of our community.